here now, though, to speak of Chiron as the symbolism of part of the spiritual awakening process. And in astrology, astrology is a great symbolic use for and a mirror for a human's development and experiences here on this three-dimensional planet called Earth. And Chiron is a minor planet in our solar system. It was discovered in 1977 by Charles T. Cowell. It was the first of a series of discoveries that we now call centaur planets. Centaurs in mythology were unruly characters who would upset the status quo and wreak havoc. It's useful to use these symbolisms as real breakthroughs and awakeners in our own human life journey. The most civilized of the centaurs, which was known for his, as I said, rowdy and unpredictable behavior, is Chiron. And his personal skills were highly advanced and included archery, music, medicine, prophecy. He was a healer, an astrologer, a mentor, and a teacher. And he was hit in the thigh by a poisoned arrow. And ironically, being the master of healing arts, could not heal himself, which we all often see with healers in our modern day. They can be the flashlight for others, but it can be tough to take a look at our own travels. So hence the term, the wounded healer, for Chiron. And think of Chiron as a process of the soul's awakening. It crosses Saturn's orbit. It goes between Jupiter and Uranus, which explains the awakening or the aha quality that often comes during Chiron transits. And what I'm going to speak to here, because there's a bridging effect here, is the Uranus opposition. What is called the midlife crisis has a very real and viable transit that occurs in people's lives, anywhere from about 38 to 46. And what this is representational is that Kundalini energy. Kundalini energy, as many of you know, is the life force that's coiled in those lower chakras. And as we go through our incarnation, this life force starts awakening and uncoiling and pushing up through the chakra system. So during the Uranus opposition, during this mid-30 to mid-40 time period, there is a literal cycle that's occurring, pushing people to awaken to their own spiritual selves. And what this is about is encapsulating this in the heart chakra, What you find happening is that maybe 30 to 40% of the populace actually does the work that's involved with this, which is part of taking stock of your life. Are you living an authentic life that represents the changing and evolving you that you've become? Now, people act it out in different ways. This is where things are very ripe for affairs in primary committed relationships. Seeking to experience a level of freedom in the world out there. But at a deeper level, it really is about bringing that Kundalini energy up into the heart, which is the awakening of your spiritual truth, of your spiritual path, of what holds meaning for you, what is the heart center of your life, how can you connect more deeply with that. And those who can encapsulate and integrate the spiritual energy in the heart. And you're seeing more and more men who are getting this because men are becoming much more involved in the parenting process. It's easier for women, I think, women who are in the parenting process to encapsulate this heart chakra and embrace it. And you're seeing this more and more with men in our society because what opens the heart more than parenting, really, it is a different connection to another human soul. And so more men are navigating this a bit better than perhaps they used to because of that natural inclination of the bonding process of being a parent. But for those who don't and continue to stick to the patterns of behavior, the expectations in the world out there, the patriarchal society of good, bad, yes, no, black, white, then things can get a little bit more challenging as you head into that 50-51 year mark, which is the Chiron return. And this is very interesting, the Chiron return. And we see that the Chiron squares, mid-20s. Chiron, again, is a maverick, so its orbital period can be erratic, but it essentially takes 50 years to move around the sun. So hence the Chiron return, which we can, as astrologers, can count on around the 50-51 mark. And what has happened is if that Kundalini has been embraced and accepted and integrated into the heart chakra, at the Chiron return, it's now moving up into the throat and into the third eye of increased psychic activity, and then into the crown chakra of illumination. So this literally is a physiological process, an energetic process, a spiritual process. And if people haven't processed that midlife crisis in their 30s and 40s, that often comes back around to be looked at this 50-51 year mark. And you can tell where people have been supported in this and perhaps where they haven't. Because what I see as a counseling astrologer and now working with over a couple thousand clients is the 50s is where the autoimmune deficiency starts in, where there's glandular issues, where there's inflammation issues. It can literally take root in the body. And what I'll share with you is an experience I had when I was going through my midlife crisis. I was having problems making the change. I was wearing my very conventional corporate outfit. I was a corporate trainer, I was writing books, etc., but still not overtly working with my truth of astrology and energy work and healing work. And I would never advertise it. It would be used under subterfuge with the coaching clients that I had. I was a business coach. And what happened was I was outgrowing my life, and I was being called to another level and dimension of growth. But I was having real trouble making that change. So what happened was a life-saving surgery in the form of my appendix. It exploded, and I didn't get in quickly enough. And, well, I did get in quickly enough, obviously, because if you don't have surgery, you don't continue in this dimension. But I did get in, but I was late, so I was very sick. I had gangrene and abscesses and whatnot. And Chiron was just moving into a trine with my ascendant. And a trine is an opportunistic energy. It's a supportive energy. And as I came out of surgery, and I was literally on bed rest for 6 to 8 weeks. I was very, very sick. And people were telling me how awful this was. And oh my goodness, and you know what? I was thinking, this is wonderful. How often had I had a chance to rest, truly rest, without any expectation from anyone for a 2-month period where I could think back and connect and process emotions and review my life. And I had a lot of spiritual awakenings that occurred during this time. Through my dreams, they were literally going back and shifting memories, clearing out painful imprints and conditioning. It was one of the most powerful experiences in my entire life. And this was 7 years ago. And from that point on, I started to really claim and embrace who I was. Now, I came from a family of educators. There's a Wiley school in upstate New York, professors, doctors. I don't come from a family of astrologers, so this was a very tough transition. But it was who I was. It was my calling. I've been playing with mythology and reading them to my childhood friends since I was in grade school. The knowing of that began early, and it began young, and it does for many people. Children are very spiritually attuned during those first few years of life, 4, 5, 6 years of age. I remember my kindergarten teacher carried such light, and we were learning how to tell time, and I remember literally thinking, time, who cares? This isn't real. I want to spend time near that woman who carries this beautiful bright light. That was the reality of my soul connection with her. But of course, then that educational process starts kicking in, and we start learning what's good and bad and right and wrong. And I remember very clearly as a little girl understanding that there was this new game that I had to adhere to that was really not about me. So often when these transits are coming in and through the 30s, 40s, and 50s, it really is about connecting to what we knew intrinsically before the conditioning and the modeling when we were little babies and little toddlers and little kindergartners and first graders and second graders. So take a peek at that too, because the people who are unable to make this process, again, when I look at the client chart, I'm often seeing Chiron connections in the way of health issues, of glandular issues, of a lot of autoimmune deficiency issues coming up. And I just read about 2 weeks ago that women in their 50s are now the highest demographic for narcotic abuse. Because this is the time, if this is not done and connected and integrated and healed, where people really start the numbing process through alcohol, through drugs, through just escaping from any unprocessed pain and any unprocessed authentic connection with your soul, with your vibrational energy. So very, very powerful. And Chiron, as I said, is transiting through Pisces, which is bringing a very ripe time for healing through music. I mean, we know that music and energy are aligned. You can watch Eben Alexander's interview or read his book on his near-death experience, where he, one of the more profound near-death experiences on record, where he absolutely connected with music, beauty, and energy together in the universal experience as he was having this near-death experience that went on for about a week while he was in deep trauma, in a deep coma rather. I encourage you, Eben Alexander. And Chiron in Pisces is really the modality through music, through creative visualization, through meditation. All of these avenues are ways to get closer to self, closer to your vibrational truth. I mean, the healing can be accomplished through music, art, contemplation, creative imagery, water. Hydrating is really important during this time. I mean, within a short period of dehydration, our cerebral functioning becomes impaired. And I'll assert that half the world, if not 3/4 of the world, is walking around on a day-to-day basis in a dehydrated state. Water is imperative. Clean water, healthy water is imperative to the functioning of that physical body. You know, mind is the energy, the body is the matter. Energy runs the matter. So hence my connection with the creative visualization process. And music is a great way to raise the vibratory levels too. You're the most important person in your world. As you take care of yourself, heal yourself, then that's given out to everyone and everything around you. And you know, Melanie Reinhardt, who's done some great work in this Chiron area, you know, a quote from her is, "It's okay to express your hidden faults and to approach that which you find repulsive inside." It's called the shadow material. We all feel that we carry something that's absolutely unacceptable. If anyone knew who we really were, they wouldn't love us or respect us. That's something that the human mind and psyche carries around, most of us, in the darker resources of our psychological understanding. And this has to do with the level of conditioning of things, of that teacher, parent, priest culture, of the patriarchal society that we have all been part and parcel to. So if I look at Chiron in the chart, you know, Chiron in the natal chart in the first house is often showing me someone who doesn't feel safe or doesn't feel viable being here on this planet, being here and being themselves. And what often occurs is we discover that the mother really didn't want to be pregnant, really didn't want to have the child, and that's how deep the imprinting goes in vitro before, you know, the actual birthing occurs. Chiron in the second house of the chart is often speaking to someone who feels that money and resources are about manipulation and being tied by strings. If I do something nice for you, I'm going to want something in return. So this can be an experience as a young adult where parents had money and resources, but there was a heavy price to pay. So as you mature, you're wondering about someone's motives behind any kindness they may show you. And this can also manifest as abundance issues. Chiron in the third house in the natal chart has to do often with harsh sibling situations, maybe the early educational process. I see this with people who were in Catholic school, children who perhaps stuttered or had a learning disability. And so this is the wound, and as you embrace that and understand that your way of learning or the environment in which you learned was not the norm and was perhaps even painful, well, then you can begin to set yourself free. Chiron in the fourth house of the natal chart is often speaking to a real disassociation with one of the primary parents. Either the parent wasn't there was some real abuse emotionally and otherwise, and the child goes on to have a deep mistrust of that gender, whoever the problem parent was. I often find Chiron in the fourth is someone who's really sincerely interested in psychology and understanding the deeper mechanisms of their own motivations and others. Chiron in the fifth house can often be speaking to where a child's innate creativity and self-expression was sat upon or was not allowed in some fashion. And you have this with, what we would speak now of indigo children. I have Chiron in the fifth house. I didn't speak about a lot of the things I experienced, about my precognitive dreams, about my intuitions. I understood early that I had to cover this up and I had to pretend to be normal. That's what I would tell myself. And so I started playing this role. And that was an innate, natural avenue in which I felt very creative and empowered and spiritual and beautiful and wonderful. But that was not really mirrored in a healthy way in my early life. So that was definitely a part that I had to go back and reclaim. As I shared, at the midlife crisis, I had to do the work and the integration and the wounding of that. Chiron in the sixth house can often speak to where there is some wounds in the day-to-day environment. There are upsets. This can be about moves, not having any consistency. It can be a hyper-diligence with the day-to-day living in order to provide a sense of security. And Chiron in the sixth can really manifest as some health issues too, where that energy-matter connection is even more so amplified. Chiron in the seventh often has to do with a missing parent through no fault of the child. This could be a parent who went off to war. This could be a parent who put the child up for adoption because they were teenagers or they were living at a time or in a place that was not accepting or they couldn't provide for the child. And so the Chiron in the seventh energy comes out as a feeling of abandonment in later years when the person is getting involved in personal relationships. Chiron in the natal eighth house often has to do with a child who is really quite isolated, who didn't have anyone to lean on. They were on their own and learned how to function and to handle that. Now, what happens in later years is a real suspiciousness and discomfort with true intimacy because there was not that bond, that safety net, that security as an early child, as a young child. And so that's the area to be healed, integrated, and worked through into adulthood. Chiron in the ninth house can show up as growing up in a household with strict religious ideals. I've often found too, this is very interesting, Chiron or Nessus in the ninth house, children whose parents, I've had a number of clients whose parents were in concentration camps. So the ninth house is the nationality too, the connection to the world philosophically and spiritually around them. And so that literal DNA of not being okay, not being good enough, and in fact being bad and a bother to society was passed down through that child's DNA. Chiron in the ninth can also be someone who didn't have the resources to go on to a higher education, higher level of training, or certification because the money wasn't there, or perhaps the scholastic grades from high school weren't there, and there's a sensitivity and a wound around that. Chiron in the 10th house of the natal chart often has to do with authority figures, abusive experiences at the hands of authority as a child. And so the person will repeat this pattern, working for horrible bosses. I had one client who said, well, you know, I was really going to leave and I only have 1 year left to my retirement the last time my boss hit me. And you know, this is a reality for some people, that this is okay at some level, and I have to stick through it for my retirement and my security. This is always often tied back to early experiences where the child received abusive imprints at the hand of someone who was an authority figure. Chiron in the 11th house of the natal chart often has to do with peer group issues and bullying, not feeling safe, not feeling accepted in the peer groups, in the social contacts. And so what this person has to reclaim into adulthood is that, yes, there are many groups of people, but there are nice groups of people too. And this is the person who can often go on to be a great champion and leader of groups, understanding how others can feel suppressed and put down by these very groups. And then Chiron in the 12th house, very interesting. I find Chiron in the 12th are the natural intuitives, natural psychics, empaths, spiritual connections, and this just wasn't accepted ideologically or otherwise. Or the child just wasn't in an environment where they could process their own intuitiveness, their own sensitivities. But it is a natural inclination to read the world around them, to read the energies around them, to connect with other dimensions of energies. They're great healers. They were great healers in past lifetimes, perhaps sages, astrologers, etc. And this is a natural gift that they've brought in with them to this life. So the challenge is to reconnect with who they already are in order to feel comfortable and safe doing that. So these are just some examples of Chiron through the natal houses. I'm going to leave you with that. Below is a link to find the natal Chiron in your own house, or the own sign, and you can probably overlay that into what house it is in. Again, Chiron is transiting through Pisces through April of 2018, and through 2015, Chiron will be moving up to 21 degrees of Pisces. Really a time to heal through creativity, through music, through beauty, through artistry, through contemplation, meditation, yoga, all of those creative processes that elevate vibrational energy. A pleasure speaking with you. Namaste.